Hola, welcome to my channel Clear Vision, and today we're going to be exploring the role of childhood in developing empathy. We're going to delve into the neurobiology of empathy and highlight the work of, I'm going to use some of the work of Allan Schore, who is a neuroscientist who also worked on attachment. So his work was I think he's still going, is extremely, has been groundbreaking over the last 20 to 30 years. So he works on affect regulation, affect being emotional regulation, and attachment, and discusses the concept, or going to discuss the concept of the dyadic dance, why it's important, and examine adolescence as a crucial time for positive intervention, because understanding these elements can help us foster empathy in our own children and support healthy emotional development. So let's dive in. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's a fundamental aspect of human connection and emotional intelligence. Most of us have a fair idea of what it is, some more than others, but it's kind of like the way I would describe it is if you have sympathy, let's say someone falls in the ice, you have sympathy, you go, oh my God, I'll come and save you, and you jump into the, run across the ice and fall in yourself. Now you're experiencing the same as what they're experiencing, but you're completely immersed by it. Empathy would be, oh my God, you're falling in the ice. I know it's really cold. Keep breathing. I'm here. Keep talking to me. I'm going to get some help. I'm with you. And if they start panicking, I know you're panicking. I'm going to help. So it's kind of like but you don't run across the ice and fall in yourself. So emotionally, you don't fall into their emotions. You don't let their emotions consume you. So like I said, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, but not fall in with it. It's a fundamental aspect of human connection and emotional intelligence. And developing empathy from a young age is crucial for building healthy relationships and a compassionate society. So, and this is often overlooked, actually, how young this actually starts, this development of empathy. So the neurobiology of empathy is as follows. We need to look at the neurobiological aspects, the brain's mirror neuron system. Maybe you've heard of mirror neurons. This plays a significant role in empathy development. Mirror neurons are activated both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action, hence the mirroring. And this mirroring mechanism helps us understand and resonate with others' emotions. So I said I was going to mention Allan Schore and neurobiology. He is a prominent figure in the field of neuropsychology and neurobiology and has extensively studied affect regulation, emotional regulation, and attachment. He emphasizes the importance of early relational experiences in shaping the brain's development. Not only does he emphasize it, it's been proven time and time and time again. So our capacity for emotional regulation and empathy starts with the attachment relationship between the caregiver and the child. This is pivotal for healthy emotional development. It's sometimes referred to as the dyadic dance, which is, when you hold a baby and you see parents and other people and the kind of baby that smiles, you smile back, you laugh, you giggle, they laugh, they giggle, there's eye-to-eye contact, it's brain-to-brain contact. This is the dyadic dance, and it's dyadic because it's between two of you. It's the interactive emotional exchanges between a caregiver and the child. Schore said or discovered that mum is best, but other people, if mum's not available, other people are a good second best. So it's always important to do this with children, with babies, because there's an awful lot going on that we don't know about neurobiologically. So these exchanges are crucial for developing the child's ability to regulate their emotions and understand other people's feelings. So during these interactions, caregivers respond to the child's emotional cues. They provide comfort, validation, and guidance. If a baby cries, you get that pang and you're like, okay, you can feel their distress. It's exactly that. It's a connection. It's an empathic connection. And this process helps the child learn to manage their own emotions and develop empathy. Schore, I think at one point said, you cannot spoil a child emotionally up until the age of about 3 or 4. Then you can start to kind of really mollycoddle them and wrap them in cotton wool, and it can start to have a detrimental effect. But before that, there's no such thing as too much empathy or too much or over the top empathy, if you like. So if you imagine the developing brain in the child, there's all these mirror neurons firing out. Every time they have a positive experience, every time they have this reflective experience, the brain starts firing out billions upon billions per second, billions of neurons per second, which are making connections. And it's connections in the brain. So it's literally promotes when you have that interaction with your child or someone else's child, even at toddler age and all the rest of it, and it's kind of, oh my God, you've fallen over. Yeah, I know it hurts. Or I remember having grazed knees, all of that stuff. Or like I say, the giggling and the making noises and the silly raspberries and all the rest of it. What's going on for the child's brain, for the developing brain, is all of these neurons firing out. They're making connections between memory centers, emotional control centers. All of these connections are starting to happen. And each time one of those experiences happen, the more neurons fire out and connect. So if you imagine the connections being two neurons, let's make it really basic. Two neurons, from a baby giggles and you look them in the eye and you giggle back. Connection. Mirror neurons connect. Then you do it again. More mirror neurons connect. And before you know it, you've got this strand, this like cabling, if you like, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of connection. And so literally there's a physical growth within the brain. If it's a negative interaction, if the child is stressed, if it's an anxious environment, a stressful environment, the child will produce cortisol like we all do during stress. Cortisol actually starts to sever and break down these connections. So it's really, really important. I don't think this is ever emphasized enough to help a child, for this kind of like a healthy environment for a child to grow up in. If you're an anxious parent, maybe it would be a good idea, and I don't want to sound judgmental here, I'm not being that at all, but if you're always anxious, if you're nervous, if you're in a toxic relationship, it's actually going to do harm to your child. Maybe directly with them, but indirectly with you, because if mother's way of being is that the world is not safe, she's anxious, she's stressed and all the rest of it, the child just feeds off it. The child doesn't have this cognitive ability to understand it until later on in life. So at the time of being a baby and a toddler and a developing early child, it's just like, oh, okay, it's a survival thing. Mum's anxious, therefore the world's not safe. Therefore I need to be anxious. Cortisol gets produced. Connections get severed within the brain. Literally kills brain cells. So more and more positive interactions, more and more empathic, brain-to-brain, eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart interactions. That mirroring is so, so important for development. I mean, as a slight aside, they discovered that it was some war orphans years ago, and they'd noticed that in the teenagers, or prepubescents, who'd had so much trauma, an inconsistent caregiving and an inconsistent caregiver, so it was a different nurse every night in these orphanages. The temporal lobes were going dark on brain scans, which were very similar. A doctor just said, this is very similar to like car crash victims whose personality changes and they lack remorse and empathy. And also people who've had heart attacks and like the brain has been starved of oxygen and presenting the same problems. And this is happening to these children, literally abuse, neglect has a massive physical effect, not just an emotional effect, a physical effect on the brain. And then they found in these orphans, their brains were up to a third undersized compared to a child within a healthy environment. So environment is crucial. Parents' health is crucial. Their mental health is crucial. I'm going to come back to this because this leads on. Childhood and adolescence are quite obviously critical periods for developing empathy and emotional intelligence, the developing brain, the physical architecture of the brain and all the different centers connected up. And so, like I said, long-term memory, short-term memory, emotional regulation, control, experience, all of this stuff. These positive interventions during these stages can significantly influence a child's ability to empathize and form healthy relationships. That's kind of where I'm going with this video. This dyadic dance with the baby creates empathy. What's empathy? Going back over it, it's you and I. It's me experiencing you. It's you experiencing me. That's empathy. So, and it starts right at this very, very basic, almost seems, completely irrelevant level of you smile at me, I smile back. I smile at you, you smile back. You giggle, I giggle. You laugh, I laugh. It's that. And it's like, oh, me and you and me. It's the beginnings of empathy. When it comes to adolescence, when going back to the war orphans, what they noticed, or what originally the scientists thought was, oh, okay, the damage is done. This damage cannot be corrected. And then they started noticing, as the children were placed into secure environments where there was empathy and consistency in the caregiving and consistent caregivers, the brain started to heal itself and grow again. The temporal lobe started to come back on scans, started to light back up. The emotional regulation centers started to work. Cognition started to work. Connections started to be made again, because you go think it's extreme neglect and trauma and cortisol's running through these children's bodies and their brains, doing all of this damage. And then, it's like, okay, so it's game over, because we didn't know the brain could regenerate that way. And then they realized it could. And there's a reason for it, because from the baby's developing brain, where it's firing out billions and billions of neurons, after about 1 to 2 years old, that process starts to slow down. It keeps slowing down until adolescence. So you flick into puberty and that developmental stage, and the brain really goes crazy again, and every interaction creates billions and billions of neurons firing out once again. So it's like a second really intense developmental stage, and this is the ideal stage for reparation work, because it'll have the most effect the quickest way possible. It's also a very, very vulnerable stage, where if there is toxic environments, it can do a lot of damage, and then it takes longer to repair, because once you get past puberty and you're starting to get through adolescence, the brain reaches full maturation at 24 years old, roughly. Therefore, then it starts to slow down its growth. Then brain cells start to die off, and they're replenished at less of a rate than they were during childhood and adolescence. It's part of why learning takes longer when you're older, learning new things like that. And it's the same with the emotional stuff. So to correct early childhood trauma, to correct early childhood negative experiences in toxic environments, takes longer to do the older the individual gets. Childhood and adolescence, that switch over at puberty, are the ideal times for those positive interventions, because you're going to have the most effect the quickest. Putting all of this together, I am, and it does promote the idea of and the necessity of a secure attachment from an early age as being really, really essential. And caregivers can foster secure attachment by being responsive, consistent, and emotionally available. Consistency is really key. And by caregiver, it can be mother, grandmother, auntie, father, uncles, etc., etc. But like they said, they discovered that the mother-child bond, the mother bond, is the most powerful one of all. And if you're still a bit doubtful, Schore managed to get, through Shore's work and the work of the other neurobiologists as well and psychologists, they managed to recognize that the original thing to look out for was physical abuse within family environments. Physical abuse creates the most damage to children. And they discovered actually that's not the case. The most damage that's done to children is through neglect. Neglect destroys, literally hinders brain growth, destroys connections the most, and in an intense way. It literally does physical damage to the brain. So it came up the rankings. So instead of social services, etc., looking for just physical abuse, it actually moved neglect to the top, because it literally does so much damage, and it does to adults as well. There's so much cortisol going on. We don't do well in isolation. We don't do well without validation from others as well as ourselves. We don't do very well in toxic environments, oddly enough, or by being complete. And one of the most toxic ones is to be completely neglected. Anyway, going back to adolescence, the other thing that's going on in adolescence is, which maybe helps people understand what's going on for the teenager, is if you imagine the brain as a tree. So from early childhood, this tree has been created with all these branches on. What happens in adolescence is that the brain whilst it goes into this second mode of building connections and firing out mirror neurons, it also starts trimming off what it doesn't need. So connections it does need, it reinforces, it pushes the growth back into that, just like a tree. If you trim the branches, growth goes elsewhere. New experiences are coming on, new cognition is switching on, the child moves from understanding, that, say for instance, if you roll a ball behind a settee and it comes out the other side, a young child's going to go, wow, it disappeared. The adolescent understands because of cognition and analysis and logic and stuff that the ball, unless it's Schrodinger's cat, still exists behind the settee until it comes out the other side. It's rolling along it. It starts, the child understands physics a little bit and all the rest of it. So, the brain starts to trim off what it doesn't need, and we move from sort of being image-based and abstract-based to more cognitive-based, and that's what's going on. And through all of this massive growth and trimming and all the rest of it, that's why you can, when you say, oh, teenagers' brains are like skew, they're like mush. Well, that's because it's literally changing physically. It's moving itself around. It's growing and cutting, literally severing connections and growing in other places. So it's like that. That's where that whole kind of like, I hate you, but I want you to take me into town at the same time so I can be with my friends. That's where all of that weird logic and lack of understanding comes from. But to help your teenager get through this, to help your child get through this, model empathy yourself. Children learn by observing the behavior of adults around them. So therefore, caregivers, it's a good idea to model empathic behavior, show compassion, listen actively, validate the child's feelings. And this modeling helps children understand how to respond empathically to others. Developing within your child emotional language, emotional understanding, emotional literacy, if you like, emotional intelligence, activities, reading books about emotions, discussing feelings, using emotion cards, exploring feelings and how they come with bodily sensation, anger, volcano, inside my stomach, heat, all of this stuff. This all helps your child understand themselves more. And then there's this kind of like, what we do a lot as human beings is we look for negative behaviors. So we suppress that. You're not allowed to be angry, but we don't actually teach the child how to express that anger. You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be this. You're not allowed to be that. It doesn't have to be negative. It can be anger, can be love, because love can hurt too. Love can cause pain. Can be anger, can be sadness. What we don't do is show our children how to express this stuff through creativity, through emotional language, emotional literacy, emotional intelligence and stuff. And also, if you see your child, where I was going with this is, if you see your child being empathic towards another, recognize it. Recognize it, validate it, highlight it, praise it, reinforce it with that positive reinforcement, if you like. Wow, I saw what you did with your friend there. You sat down, they were really sad. You sat down and you listened to them and or you saw that child was being on their own and you must have thought somehow you went and kept them company. So obviously there's this empathy, you must feel lonely. It's not about being a people pleaser or whatever, or sympathy, jumping into the ice with other people. But if you see that wonderful, amazing empathic behavior, praise it, highlight it. The more you do that, the more the child will, your child will conduct conduct those behaviors. The more your child will behave that way, because it's getting this positivity from it. And the more and the less, the more the negative stuff will kind of like fall away by the wayside. Because no one wants to hear, don't do this, no, you can't do that, negative, 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 negative. And there's never anything positive. Even as adults, we don't respond too well to that. But we're still quite guilty of doing it with children in order to get them to socially fit in and socially comply. So remembering, and it's the same as I do with adults whenever, you're moving yourself away from trauma, you're in recovery, you're healing yourself, all those small achievements along the way are worth highlighting, are worth celebrating, are worth being recognized. And it's the same with your child. And it will, again, you're displaying empathy, you're showing it. Wow, I saw what you did there. It was really, it was really great. I was so touched by it, all that stuff. It is only going to have a positive effect. I must admit the camera stopped halfway through recording this, so I hope I've picked it back up in the right place. Until I see you next time, I hope you got some insights from that, and I will see you very soon. Please take very good care of yourselves. Adios.